Welcome once more to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist at John Jay College here in New York City. I'm so glad you have joined us once again for the show that seeks to look for a new narrative, a more progressive narrative, a narrative that will stress a more loving, a more compassionate, a more egalitarian, less racist, less violent, militaristic society. And I am absolutely thrilled to have on the show today my bride, my new wife, Beatty Cohan-Vrettos, who is a nationally renowned psychotherapist, sex therapist, author, media star. Will later be playing a clip from The Daily Show. She is the joy of my life, and we would like to share a wonderfully fun and serious discussion on living and bringing about healthier and more loving relationships in a world that is hurting and is fearful. So how do we help people and help society heal itself in a sense or become more loving? How can we build relationships that people are going to be more satisfied in? And you've worked in this field for your whole life.
Right, over 35 years.
35 years.
Yes.
And for our audience, I've mentioned this a couple times on the shows last week, I think it was, a week before, that we have known each other for many, many decades. As you would say, we've taken one or two detours. And we are now back together again, and we just had a fabulous wedding in which we included so many of our dear friends and loving comrades, officiated by Rabbi Michael Lerner, who himself has gotten married in the last year or two. Cornel West was there, and he too has gotten married. Cornel got married a few months ago. Noam Chomsky has gotten married within the last year or so. So it seems like the left, the progressive left, are seeking to join and perhaps gain the sort of love and compassion that they have not quite been able to get their whole lives. So what's going on, Beatty? Are we moving toward a healthier, more loving world and relationships, and how do we bring that about?
It's not just the left or it's not just the right.
Exactly.
I think that everybody, Jim, we're
right.
all wanting to have a sustained and loving and healthy relationship. However, the reality is that we're not doing very well.
Well, the question also becomes, Beatty, since that's why we're bringing more of the progressive left for now on this, because they, for the last 50 years or so, since the 60s, the cultural wars of the 60s, began to question those more traditional relationships, the feminists of their times, and looking at their parents, the children of the 60s, saw adults who were not very happy and not very fulfilled in these relationships. But you're absolutely right. We're all looking for better, healthier, loving relationships. And where can the progressive imaginative movement lead us toward that goal?
Well,
if we can.
I've actually identified 3 reasons why we are all, whether we're right or left or progressive,
Right.
whether or not,
Okay.
whatever political affiliation that we are or that we have, we need to be in a really good place ourselves, emotionally, psychologically, psychiatrically, if we're going to be able to have a successful relationship with anyone, whether or not we are progressive or right or left or Jewish or Muslim. Those are really not the issues. And I think that people have to do a lot more homework when it comes to taking care of their own well-being or lack of well-being. So we need to be okay first before we're going to be able to have.
That's number one.
Yes.
Okay.
Number two, I feel that the majority of people have simply not learned the ingredients that go into a successful long-term relationship. I mean, when you think about it, where are we going to learn these lessons if we were not fortunate enough to grow up in a healthy family, and so many people were not? And if you look to what is going on or literally not going on in our schools, I mean, the kids are not learning anything really about relationships. I mean, there may be some sex education, but in terms of healthy relationships, that is also something that the kids, they're graduating from school. And who are the role models? The Kardashians. If somebody wanted to interview me or Kim Kardashian about love, she would be booked, okay? So again, we don't have positive role models. So if we don't know what ingredients go into a healthy, long-lasting relationship, we're in no position, and of course this is what my book is about, For Better, For Worse, Forever, Discover the Path to Lasting Love. We are in no position to be able to assess who's right for you.
So that's number 2 now.
That's number 3.
You've got to be in the...
We've got to be in a good place. We need to know the ingredients that go into a healthy relationship, and then we have to be willing and we need to be serious about assessing, going through a real assessment process
Of the partner.
of the partner to find
Okay.
out who somebody is and who somebody isn't. And what my research found was that it takes close to a year using my 10-step formula to really discover who your partner is and isn't. And unfortunately, we're not able to fast forward the process. We want everything yesterday. And when it comes to really finding out who is this person, we need to go through a process of discovery.
But you're willing to admit that there are people who take longer, less time, could be 6 months, could be 2 years. There are individual differences. There are also, what about the larger structure that people are operating under? If lack of education and lack of job training are impinging on that relationship and putting such pressure on it, I mean, impact of racism, impact of mass incarceration on relationships, it gets pretty complicated. And you're testing people to great limits of their patience, aren't they?
That's absolutely, it's absolutely true.
Right.
However, when I finished my graduate and postgraduate work at McGill University in Montreal, I began working in the inner city areas, okay, where people were waiting for the welfare checks to come so that there was going to be sufficient food at the end of the month in order to be able to feed the kids. Now, in the last 25 or 30 years, my patients in Sarasota, Florida, in Providence, in East Hampton, and here in New York City in my private practice have been primarily middle and upper middle class and some very, very wealthy people.
Right.
The differences in terms of relationship knowledge and relationship skill was negligible. It didn't.
Communication and things like that.
No, there were no differences.
No differences in terms of...
So the socioeconomic factor did not play in the over 35,
Major
I keep
role.
saying 40 years that I've been practicing in terms of those particular areas. I mean, obviously, if somebody is having to wait for their welfare check in order to come in, that's going to put enormous pressures on the family. It's going to put enormous pressures on the relationship. But the fundamental relationship education knowledge across the board, Jim, is lacking. And I feel, of course, that the schools have a tremendous role that they could potentially be playing in teaching the kids early on about healthy relationships.
Now, loving relationships, where does love come in on this? Is that something that can be taught? Where does that get learned, experienced? People have different capacities. What are people looking for in terms of love, romantic love, companionship? I mean, these are issues that have bedeviled humankind since the dawn of written history, right?
We're all looking for connection. We're all
connection.
looking for connection. In fact, there was a Harvard study.
Love is a connection. Is that what you're saying?
Love, Yes, a
Okay.
connection to
Something
to
beside
somebody.
ourselves, in a sense.
Absolutely. In fact, there was a very interesting Harvard study. It was a 75-year study, which is incredible in itself. And they followed 100 men. So this was a male study. And at the end of the 75 years, they asked these men, so what did you learn? What was really
What was
important?
it all about? Yeah.
And it was not the bigger, better, more. It was not the houses and the money and the stocks. It was love and connection. And I hear that all the time from the students. I'll get calls from young women who are in colleges, and they're interviewing me, and they want to know what I think about relationships and sex. And they're telling me that they're having a lot of sex, but that they're disappointed. They're disappointed that they haven't found the ideal relationship that they were hoping to find in college. They're also very disappointed in what is going on and not going on sexually. And I remember in a recent conversation, this young woman said, but he didn't even care whether or not I had an orgasm. And I said, honey, you just met him at a party. Why do you think he would possibly care about you or your orgasms or lack of orgasms when there was no connection, when you didn't even know each other?
Let me also, got it, at a micro level, but at a macro level, don't we all live in a society here, American culture, where we don't really care and nurture and compassionate and love each other? We're commodities. We get to be used and abused and on to the next one. So how does one maintain or build a healthy, loving relationship in the face of a society that has moved further and further away from that?
We have
In our policies, mass incarceration, war, and so on and so on, poverty rates skyrocketing.
we have some homework that we need to take care of. And, you know, as you hear me saying all the time on my Ask Beatty radio show on the Progressive Radio Network, that we have some due diligence that we need to really address. I mean, if you grew up, for example, in a family where you never saw love, there may have been abuse, there may have been sexual abuse, substance abuse, violence. I mean, this young child is not going to learn from mom and dad if they were lucky enough to grow up in a family where there was a mom and dad, or mom and mom. I mean, we have so many different variations and so many different family forms right now. So that, and that's why people come to see me, is that they're not sure. They're not sure what is love. I mean, love, to teach people about consideration and respect and commitment and honesty. And I think for a lot of people, these are just concepts, especially if you have not experienced this kind of thing in your own family. But for people who are seeking love, they need to read, they need to take classes, they may need to go to therapy.
But is it also a world of feelings that, as Freud would say, if you've been doted on as a young child, an infant, you're one of the luckiest human beings in the world, because that stays with you. So if you're not getting it early on, and that doting and that sort of what Christianity calls agape love, just love that is not expecting anything in return. You know, how does one help people construct themselves in such a way so that they can feel that, or begin to feel that they are worthy of being loved, so that they can then go love someone else? That's, boy, that's difficult.
It's such a great,
the therapeutic process.
It's such a great question. And that is, I would say, the majority of people that I treat. That is exactly where they're at, and that is exactly why they are in therapy with me.
You've got to make up for a lot of of losses or things that they never got.
Yes, and they have to be helped therapeutically to emotionally work through their traumas of the past, their unfinished business, the love that they didn't receive, the violence that they may have experienced, so that they're then in a position, Jim, to be able to live in the moment. And if you can't live in the moment, and if you always have one foot in the past and one foot in the present, you're always unhinged. And once people are able to feel better about themselves.
Self-love.
Self-love.
Right? That's where it starts.
That's number one.
Not narcissism. We're not talking about that.
No,
As
no. Although healthy self-love is good. It's
strong, good ego.
But we have to be okay with ourselves. And that's where the unfinished business from the past has to be dealt with as best as one can, even
Otherwise
though we can't change history.
Otherwise, we play it out in these destructive, unhealthy ways, right?
Exactly. I mean, violence begets violence.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a process that people have to be willing to go through. And unfortunately, the vast majority of people aren't willingly going to be saying to themselves, I think I need to deal with all of this. It isn't until they go through traumas and one disappointment after another, and they say to themselves, why am I always ending up with Mr. Wrong or Ms. Wrong? There's some work that I really need to do. And for me, it is making sure that we are in a good place, then educating ourselves about what is a healthy relationship. People
Because otherwise
who've never seen it, they're not going to know.
And will come out in very possibly self-destructive ways, drug abuse, alcoholism, or even externalized in violent ways.
Exactly.
Repressed needs and dissatisfied feelings about love can be transferred or projected onto others, and others become scapegoats and venting of one's inner it gets complicated, right? And in a society that breeds that pits one against each other,
Exactly.
like that, it's
But
a
what
toxic
I find,
mix, isn't it?
It can be.
Right.
And I find whether or not it's students or people in their 70s and 80s and, well, people throughout their entire lives, everybody that I know, whether or not they want to be married or not, I mean, that's not the issue. Whether or not they're gay or straight or transgender, people are looking for that special connection.
All right, now listen.
Okay.
I'm going to make this a little personal here,
Okay.
because the audience is expecting it, and they've been listening to this show enough that listen, we met, 1920. I was taken by you in a millisecond, okay? I felt something, and it wasn't just, although that was considerable, physical passion. I felt that connection. Now,
we both felt that connection at that time.
At that time, okay. Now, is that crucial for any sort of healthy relationship? I'm not, you know what I'm saying? Is that absolutely necessary? I mean, there's got to be degrees and so on. Some people may not consider it as important, others in their relationship. But isn't that also possibly problematic, that love and lust and passion and attractiveness and all that get in the way of sort of the rational formula that you're talking about, which thankfully I have passed.
Yes,
yes,
you passed it. You definitely passed it.
Pretty flying colors, I think. But no, seriously.
Chemistry.
The chemistry
and passion,
business, yeah.
I feel, in looking at my personal life and clinical life, is very important. And that is the one thing that I say to patients all the time. I can't teach chemistry. I can teach all kinds of sexual techniques, and we can talk about the reasons why people are really not doing well in the bedroom in the United States. But of course the connection is important, and the chemistry is important, and the attraction is important, but it is not sufficient.
Not sufficient.
It is not sufficient.
But again, and it's often substituted for what people think, gee, I'm head over heels, I'm madly in love with her. And I just can't get enough of her, and all this sort of stuff. That's part of it, but it can also, if one is saying that that's it, they're missing a large part of it.
Look, I constantly, when I'm giving my seminars, my
Right.
Rate Your Mate Before It's Too
Right.
Late, Never Make a Mistake in Love Again seminars and keynotes based on the book, on my book.
Right.
And, you know, I will say in jest, I'm sorry for not being sufficiently romantic when we have to look at, is this person capable of effective emotional communication and emotional problem solving? And have you sufficiently assessed whether or not this person has skeletons in the closet, whether or not there is untreated psychiatric problems or abuse or substance abuse of various different kinds? I mean, we need to know who it is that we think we are madly in love with.
Is that,
We have to go through the process.
Right. And have you found in your many, many years of therapy, do you find that many people have not been able to sustain romantic love over the decades?
Absolutely.
Right.
In fact, this morning, you know, I had a patient this
Right.
morning, and he's a young man in his late 20s, very successful as an attorney, and they have a brand new little baby. And of course, the focus is all on the baby. And I think that couples need, and I say this all the time, whether or not they're new couples, couples who are in their middle age, or older couples, we have to put the couple at the top of the list of priorities. And in our crazy, busy
Right.
world, it's so easy for everything to get away. I mean, I've treated people in their 30s and 40s who haven't had sex in years, Jim. I've also treated couples in their 70s and 80s who have an incredibly active sex life. There may be issues, and there may be, you know, need for a Viagra, or Levitra, or, you know, various other, you know, different things to help,
Right.
you know, with the sexual experience. But it's very, very easy for all of these things to be put on the back burner. And if we put our relationships and our sex lives on the back burner, we are asking for big trouble.
And bound to become a train wreck as people become
Absolutely.
more repressed. And so also your role as a sex therapist has been a fascinating one in your postgraduate training at McGill. And we're going to be playing in just a second here a really funny clip that you did with Samantha Bee on The Daily Show. That's a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And so why don't we play that? That was about a spoof on
Penis pumps.
penis pumps.
Yes.
Okay.
And whether or not the government should
Should-
actually be paying, whether or not Medicare
Yeah.
should be paying for penis pumps.
The
And of course,
hypocrisy of it.
my response was absolutely.
Right.
So we'll
Of course.
take a look at
Let's
it.
take a look. Let's take a look. Beatty on The Daily Show with Samantha Bee. All right. So Beatty, that was terrific. So what do you say about that spoof there that you were involved in terms of our sexual health? What would you say to young people today, too, concerning their own sexual desires and the formula you're trying to
Well,
get people to listen to and so on?
There's a reality, however, in this country, in that we are not doing well in the bedroom. In fact, there was a study that I cite very, very frequently, and this was 100 couples. And they considered their marriages, these were married people who considered their marriages to be very good or excellent. So these were not people who were in therapy, they were just simply participants in a study. And the results were very upsetting and not surprising to me, but I think that the reality is that 50% of the women in these happy and very happy and excellent and wonderful marriages had difficulty becoming aroused.
Half.
Half
Wow.
had difficulty becoming aroused.
And still said that the relationship was
Yes,
excellent.
happy or very happy or
Okay,
excellent.
okay.
Right. 35% of these happy and very happy women had difficulty, having an orgasm, and 15% were unable to have orgasms under any circumstances at all. With the men, a third of the men had issues with premature ejaculation, which happens to be a really easy problem to resolve. So that was a third, 33 and a third percent. And this was the big number. 52% of men between the ages of 40 to 70 were having issues and challenges with erectile dysfunction.
That's an enormous
So if
percentage.
that's going on in the bedrooms
yeah.
of these happy and very happy and people who, you know, view their relationships, their marriages as excellent, I mean, you look at what's going on, you know, with other people, and there are a lot of problems. And again, people have to be in a good place themselves. If you're feeling depressed or you're having panic attacks, if you're dealing with the trauma of early child sexual abuse or substance abuse or other issues, you are not going to be in a mood, particularly for women, to, you know, to jump into bed and have sex.
But speak to the younger generation who are under enormous pressures, economic, and perhaps still living at home, and yet have all kinds of sexual desires and urges and peer pressure and so on. What would you say to them? How can this be put together here in terms of your formula and their own stressed situation? Perhaps they're not married, let's say. The
Well-
younger generation, it could be those going to college, those are not.
Well, there are a lot of people who are just hooking up.
Hooking
And
up, okay.
And certainly in the college world, certainly the research is showing that many of the kids are either drunk, you know, by you
Or
know,
drugs.
Yeah, they want to be drunk, or they're using drugs, and they're having, you know, indiscriminate, you know, kinds of sexual experiences that they are not enjoying. At least the college students that I talk to,
And a lot of women are complaining and saying that a lot of this becomes date rape or sexual
that's a whole,
harassment, abuse.
That's
become more and more of an
whole
issue.
Other issue, yes. I mean, if you're drunk and if you're drugged and you're not aware of what's going on, I mean, my position is we as women and also men, we're really putting ourselves at risk.
So we don't have the mature discussion that we need to have about relationships, love, commitment, and sex as well.
That's absolutely true.
What would you're doing a workshop with some teenagers here, young boys, young men, and young women. What are some of the concrete things you would talk to them about as you get to know them?
I think that people, young people and old people and people of all ages and stages in life, if we're talking about sex, they have to figure out for themselves, what does sex mean to them? I mean, is it just like going to Ben and Jerry's and having an ice cream cone? I mean, if it's just that, and if you're okay with that, and if your partner is okay with that, then there isn't a problem.
Just a pure physical outlet.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So people have to really, I think, look into themselves and figure out what kind of a role is sex going to be playing in my life at this stage of life. If it's a meaningless activity, okay. You know.
What if it's that's the reality, that in other words, this is their situation, they've got school, they've got work, they're at home. This may be the only real concrete reality that they have.
And if they're okay with it, and if they're using protection and they're not putting themselves at risk for STDs or unwanted pregnancies or for sexual assault allegations, then that's okay.
Okay.
As long
and
as
if they
they're
want
okay
more,
with it. If
then
they
they
want more, if they
of
want
a
more,
relationship, if you will, longer term.
then we're all going to need to become much more savvy in the world of healthy relationships. But, you know, kind of getting back to the sexual issue, so that if we're not in a good place, you know, we may very well not be interested in having sex. If our relationship is not in a good place, if you're angry with your partner, if you're disappointed in what is going on in your relationship, one of the first things that happens is that people tend to withdraw from each other emotionally and also sexually, and particularly women.
Well, I was just going to ask that, with the risk of maybe sounding sexist. Is it the women more likely to turn off the, if you will, the sexual juices. The men can be still, whatever, upset and disappointed with whatever else is going on in their life. But is there such a thing as sexual drive that's significantly different between the genders?
I think that both men and women, again, whether you're gay or straight or transgender, I think that we all have sexual drives.
Okay.
And I would say that
Women are more likely to repress.
Women are not more likely to
been
repress
conditioned
at
to?
all.
No.
But if
Okay.
I would say for women, if there is not some emotional connection, and if we're not just wanting to have a sexual activity for the
Right.
evening, where it's just going to be a hookup, where
Right.
everybody is very clear about what that is and what it is not,
Right.
then there's not going to be a problem. But if you're in a relationship and if you have all of this unfinished business with your partner, the last thing that the majority of women are going to want to do is have sex. And then
they want, as you put it, what? Emotional
foreplay.
I love that. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
I coined that
You
phrase
coined this term,
a number of
yes.
years ago.
All
and
right.
every woman knows what emotional foreplay is.
Okay.
I love you, you're beautiful, the hugs, the kisses, can I help you with the dishes and the kids? And being present, really being present.
Sensitive and kind and considerate and loving, yeah.
Exactly. And then, if you're looking at the whole issue of erectile dysfunction, I mean, one has to really look very, very seriously at the physical problems. I know that so many men will go to their urologists or their GPs, and they will be complaining of having difficulty maintaining and sustaining an erection, and then they will leave with a prescription of Viagra or Levitra or times a penis pump. And yet one has to understand, what is it that's really going on? Is there a blockage? Why is the blood flow?
Right.
Why is there not sufficient blood flow? So again, for people who are having to deal with this, you want to get a really good diagnostic evaluation, not just walking out with a prescription about why is it that the man is having erection challenges. It could be emotional,
Right.
could be anxiety, but it also really could be physical. And then with women who are menopausal and postmenopausal, again, this is something else that we have to really address. Our estrogen levels
Physiological
drop,
changes, yeah.
progesterone levels drop, testosterone levels drop. So we have to be able to, again, look very, very carefully at why is it that our normal, and I hate that word normal, but our normal and natural sexual urges are off track. Beginning with ourselves, looking at the relationship, looking at physical issues. For example, the majority of women need between 15 and 20 minutes of physical foreplay over and above the emotional foreplay.
Right.
And I think that in many, many ways, even though there seems to be, so much discussion in movies about sex, I think that people still have a lot to learn about their own bodies and about their partners' bodies. And it's still a subject, particularly in this country. People really have difficulty talking about sex and saying, this is what I need, this is what I like. And in the beginning, typically, if there is a lot of passion, it becomes a non-issue because things are working. But then as things change, as people get older, as the relationships, evolve, people need to talk about things like frequency and what I need from you in order to, want to have sex.
And if they're communicating at other levels, they'll be more naturally able to do that over sexual issues too, right? So good communication at one level gets transferred to discussions about sex too, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But now, I know we've talked about this too, that on the one hand, everyone seems to be looking for love. We want it so intensely. The haven in a heartless world, more depersonalized, bureaucratized. We want to connect. We want to feel a connection with something beyond ourselves, and it's not about money and this and that. On the other hand, as you've talked about a lot too, there's such disappointment and fatalism. Oh, it's not going to work out. I'll never find.
Yes.
So that that makes it even more of a tragedy in a sense. People want it so much, and of course, great philosophers, Freud, Nietzsche, have said perhaps the worst thing there is in life is the inability to love and incapacity to love, to give up on it in a sense. It's a sense of nihilism. What's it all about in a sense if we can't love? So at the one hand, we want it so much, and even more so as the world gets harsher and crueler and this and that. And on the other hand, we seem to be not finding it.
We're not.
And that just ratchets it up, the fatalism and the negativity and so on and so on.
Well, what's happening now
in the internet and all that stuff, right?
In the single world, I mean, the majority of people are looking for love and looking for a connection on the various different dating sites. And years ago, when I'd be interviewed, I'd say, well, I'm not so sure, but it is a reality. And I feel whether or not you meet somebody in a mosque, or in a synagogue, or in a church, or at a bar, or on a dating site, you still need to, know the ingredients that go into a healthy relationship, and you still have to be prepared and willing to go through the assessment process. So I'm not concerned
at least
if
at
people
first,
are meeting on dating sites.
Right, and get out there in the world.
Exactly.
Start living and start interacting and get,
exactly.
get out of the house and stop being holed up and feeling sorry for everything. And that's part of it. Get out there into the real world of life.
But that's number one, where again, you have to deal with your own disappointments and demons and find a way to motivate
Skeletons.
yourself. I mean, I had a patient last year who came in, and she told me she was involved with this man and that they had met on the internet. And what was really interesting is that they had been sexting and texting for 1 year, Jim, and they hadn't met face to face. So I said to her, well, why don't you just go out and have a cup of coffee? And
I'm going to sound very stupid here, but what the hell is sexting? I mean, is it sort of like making sexual overtures?
Yes, sending
Hey, I'd
nude
like
pictures,
to, whatever.
and
Oh,
I'd
I
like
see.
to do
Okay.
this,
All
and
right.
I'd like you to do
Now
that.
the audience knows how lame I am, but all right, that's okay. Sexting and texting, all right.
Well, we didn't go through that.
No, thankfully no.
Thankfully not is right.
Not necessary.
So
yes.
what happened is that they actually met, and the date, the
After
face-to-face,
how long now? A year. Oh man.
And she was so feeling this great connection to this man. Of course, it was just a fantasy. So after the first date, that was it. There was nothing there at all. And I said to her, I said, what prompted you to just continue, interacting, over the internet? And she said, well, it was easier. And I think that a lot of people, they don't want to deal with the reality. Sounds like Cornell, the reality of what it is that is going on or not going on with the person who you think you might want to be with. We're getting lazy. We got to get out. We got to go to book signings. We got to, as you say, get yourself out of the houses and the apartments and interact with people and say hello. And it's amazing what can happen.
Okay. Again, personally, you ooze of this life force and this life energy. And you have ever since I've known you. And, well, come on. And I'm sure, as you've told me as a little child, you just had it. It was wherever it came. It was natural. And it's so appealing. It's so infectious in a sense. People are so attracted to that energy. How did this come about, and how can this come about more as a society, as a culture? We seem to be turning more and more inward and more suspicious and more fearful, building walls and so on and so on. And over the internet and depersonalizing everything, commodifying people. So you never had, again, grew up in Winnipeg in a very tight-knit, wonderfully loving, giving,
Orthodox Jewish
community. All right.
We have to seek out communities. If we don't
Communities
have
are
it,
important for support
communities
and
of-
breeding that sense of
Yes.
self-love and positive energy. Is that
And-
right?
Yes, and when we talk about community, I mean, a community doesn't need to involve thousands of people.
Right.
It may be a small little community.
Right.
It may be through a church. It may be through a synagogue. It may be through a tennis group.
Or political movements, or whatever it may be.
Political movements.
Right.
But-
To connect again as human beings.
But we have to be willing to take action. I mean, so many people, will complain and they say that they want this, they want love, they want connection, they want affiliation. But if you're sitting in front of your screen, it's not really going to happen in the real world.
But that gets back to the theme of this show, that in a sense, the dominant culture has made us more passive. We are commodities. I mean, we have drone flight wars. We are passive recipients of television and digital social network and so on. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy here, but I mean, the point is, how do we break free from this
We make a choice.
culture that...
We make a choice.
Yeah, make a choice.
We make a choice.
Okay.
We can blame the culture. And I mean, there's certain things that
Or be aware of its attempt to control us. And,
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, there's certain things we can't control. What we can control is our own behavior. And if there's a learning curve to learn about love, to learn about sexuality, to learn about dating, to deal with divorce.
But you had it as a little girl, right? You listened to
Call-in
the
counseling
psychiatrist at 5 years old.
I
and,
did.
It was a call-in show.
It was a
about
pastor at midnight.
Pastor at midnight
in Winnipeg.
Winnipeg and the cold,
And I was
wild
listening-
plains there.
Right, and I was
Listening.
listening to the people.
How old were
calling
you?
in. I must have been about 8 or 9. And
8
my
or 9,
parents
okay.
had bought me this little white transistor radio.
Really?
And I don't know how in the world I discovered this show. But
Where did
I
this guy?
wanted to
Where was
be-
he programming
He
from?
was a minister.
From where? Minnesota?
Winnipeg.
Oh, Winnipeg.
From
okay.
Winnipeg, from
okay.
a church in Winnipeg.
So you
and people called in
Okay.
with their problems, and I wanted to be that minister, and I wanted to be Ann Landers.
As a good Orthodox
Yes.
Jew here, all right, yeah.
So that I was actually, I mean, this is
8
a
or
little
9.
bit of a detour, but I never had to make a decision about what I wanted to do. It was always about helping people. And, it's so interesting that I became a radio talk show host. I became
Right.
someone who's in the media. I became an Ask Beatty columnist. So
So it was very natural.
it was very natural.
Giving of yourself, and from that energy,
But I learned it from my parents.
your parents, okay,
They gave.
they gave to you.
They gave to me, and
That's
my
nice, yeah.
father, when we'd be driving through Winnipeg and it was 40 below zero, he would stop the car and he would see a man standing outside.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd say, Beatty, I want you to take this $1 to,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe this man has not had coffee or breakfast. So that was the world
That
that
human
I grew
connection
up in. It was the
again.
human connection.
That we so
yes.
desperately need, and yeah, and that's so poignant and so necessary now. As
But if
well.
we're lacking in certain areas of our life, and if we weren't lucky enough to get
Right.
the kinds of things that I was able to get, we have to do something about it. Then we have to search out people, organizations, political affiliations, books, programs, therapists if need be, to fill the void. And that's our responsibility. I mean, we can spend our lives moaning and whining about what we didn't get. And it's unfortunate that a lot of people didn't get a lot of things. But then, what do we do about it? And for me, it is about acknowledging, addressing, and resolving our issues as best as one can. And that involves taking action.
But do you think people naturally philosophize in that way? Do they sit down and say, is it, right, that's what I'm saying.
No.
It's not something, well, let me acknowledge what I'm feeling here. Let me address, let me try to resolve. So they may know, they may feel like some diffuse frustration or anger or rage or depression, but most people are at the point, well, I'm not really sure what to do with this.
We
or
need
or not even
mentors. We need
mentors.
mentors.
Okay.
We need
And that gets back to the
coaches.
school
We need
and
coaches.
educational programs.
Yes, and I feel so strongly that kids spend the majority of their time when they're not in front of the computer at school, and that the schools need to do, and we did this in Canada. We did this in Quebec when I ran the school social services program with two other people for hundreds of schools and school boards, where relationship education, where no child was left behind, where there was early identification of problems and early intervention. So it was a much more loving, of course, Canada is a much more loving country in all respects. And we were concerned about the whole child, not just about preparing the kids for their FCAT and their exams and their SATs. And people need this. If we're talking about an education, it's got to include more than math and science.
Arts, music, physical
Yes.
education, speech, and so on.
And
yeah,
relationship education.
And that was central to the Canadian school system.
Well, it
Or
was
you
when I
introduced
was
it, you introduced,
yes,
right.
Yes,
So-
we introduced it in Quebec.
And
yes.
today, if typically you would find that being taught in the high schools, junior highs, in Montreal, Toronto.
Well, I was doing
Would you
some
think?
research for my radio show,
Right.
and in the province of Ontario, relationship education, including helping the kids learn about communication and problem-solving skills and gender, begins in first grade.
First grade.
First grade,
Wow.
that's where it should begin.
Right. So first grade. So we don't even have it in high school, let alone in college or in any place.
Exactly.
So we don't get it anywhere.
We're suffering, and we're suffering
Right.
as a result.
Right. By the way, your show, which is on Progressive Radio Network,
Yes.
airs when?
Monday afternoons, live from
Monday afternoon.
from 3 to 4, and of course you can go to the Progressive Radio Network archives.
Okay.
And just Google Ask Beatty.
Ask Beatty, right?
And on Monday I did my 139th Ask Beatty show on the Progressive Radio Network.
Okay, and the numbers are
The numbers
astounding. Are great, astounding,
They're
and it
great.
just shows again the yearnings and the
Yeah.
need for this sort of connection that we don't have too much of.
It's true. I mean, I get emails from people from various different parts of the world thanking me for
Yeah.
my psychological analysis and commentary about, hard news issues and dealing with mental health issues. And people are needing this and craving it and wanting it. And we need to give them much more of this, and we're going to have then a much more loving and stable and less violent society.
You also write for the Huffington Post.
I write for the Huffington Post. I have an
Okay.
Ask Beatty
Ask
column,
Beatty,
and
okay.
I write for Three Tomatoes, and I write for Fox Health. And
And we're going to revise the book as well.
We need to revise
We're
the
doing
book.
some articles and
Yes.
stuff. So and it's just been a total joy. And with all the discussion today, it really comes down to human contact and love that two people bring to their situation. And I thank you so very, very much for the love and connections that we've had, and it just makes all the difference in the world.
and
it really
I love
does.
you so very much.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
lucky.
again, we're very lucky, and what we need to do is get that out there in the world, and as we've tried to do other times in the show, talk about the issues of radical love. How can we bring about a transformative justice system rooted in caring for the disenfranchised and reaching out? And interestingly enough, the most traumatized people are the ones that can best help us heal and show us that love. So a Martin Luther King and a Gandhi take on, or all these great, wonderful spiritual leaders, show us what true love can mean in that radical political sense, human love. And again, it's so important to try to do that individually too. And together as a couple. So, Beatty, I thank you so very, very much for doing the show today. And
I loved it.
Well, I want to say in the last seconds we have, the left, progressive, all people need to educate themselves on this. And for my comrades on the left, we need to do a much better job on all this. So thank you again so very, very much, Beatty. Love you so much. And we love you all out there in the world out there of the radical imagination. We'll see you next week. This is Jim Vrettos. Thanks for watching. Okay.